In this interview, we're talking with Implementation and Change Manager Valeria Santos and Senior Director Simon Jones about the implementation and change process for schools adopting Sentral. Topics include what it means to get this process right, what's fundamentally the same regardless of the size of the school or system, who needs to be involved in the process, and what absolutely needs to work from day one. I'm Colin Klupik. Let's dive right in. Simon, if I could start with you. Your experience is quite wide in the education technology sector, and you've worked in some very large contexts. We're just trying to set the scene here when it comes to implementation and change. Can you give us a quick run through of the scale that you've worked at?
Sure. Thanks, Colin. I'm very lucky in that my career sort of started in the UK and working with schools and groups of schools in the UK, and then over here to Australia, and as well as other schools in a region. Probably some of the projects I'm most proud of have involved somewhere between sort of 25 and 40,000 users. And that's really just looking at the teachers and staff in schools who might be using our application.
Now, I imagine that things change a bit when you're managing tens of thousands of people to smaller situations, like perhaps a few dozen or maybe a couple of hundred. But I suspect that there are some fundamental similarities, regardless of the scale. Can you give us an idea of what some of those fundamental similarities are?
So I think there's one key fundamental similarity, and that's people. So when we embark on a transformational project and we're using technology, the largest projects I've worked with, the only difference they have from one of our sort of independent schools is just the sheer number of people. So the core program is looking at change and how do we bring those people on the journey from what we envisage at the start is a successful project and what happens at the end. So the key similarity is people, and probably the favorite term that I've picked up along the way that I just love is the term "what's in it for me." So as for those people tasked with delivering a project, when you look at all of the people who you want using your software and you want transforming, you want your technology to transform their life, what you need to be asking yourself is what's in it for them? And then you can use that all the way through the project, both at the beginning in terms of getting everyone on board. And then as you go through and you ask people to contribute and perhaps put in a bit of work, you can remind them, oh, this is why we're doing it. This is what it looks like when we finish. So it's people, and what do they get out of it? That's the two core things I think that remain the same.
Well, let's talk a little bit more in detail now about what that it actually is. And Valeria, I'll come to you on this next point. I'd suggest that regardless of scale, probably one of the most important things to get right, and I suspect this might be just a perspective that most people would have, and that is at very high level, they probably just want to get it right. Like, and moving from one to another, let's just get this right. What does that actually mean? What does it look like? And can you describe that in a bit more detail?
Well, thanks, Colin. So you are right. People do want to just get it right, and that can look different for, different people. But really, when you're talking about data migration, it's the ability from moving core information from one system and actually moving it into our central system. And part of that journey is making sure that you've got all the right data set. We're actually going through a process of cleansing the data to a degree and conforming it into the best practices on getting the data into Sentral. So getting it right for a lot of people is definitely key, but I think there's actually a lot more to it throughout that process.
I'll just pick on that word that you use there, cleansing the data. I suspect that might include things like really old data that is still in paper-based formats, or perhaps it went through multiple different people who are handling that job from time to time, and therefore, you've got really different types of data. Digital data is different to paper-based data. Does that still happen? Are we talking about that?
Oh, definitely. You will see people still using paper. People will use spreadsheets. There's different mechanisms on how they'll actually manage their data. So it's really about centralizing everything and bringing it to life and being able to put it into a platform where everyone can access it in a centralized place.
Now, Simon, when I think about lots of people trying to access that information, I'll just come back to you on this. There are lots of types of information in massive data migrations, and there'd be lots of different people, different stakeholders who begin to make sure things go well. What kind of people do you think need to be at the table when this change is being considered?
So I think each organisation should be looking at their project structure, and Valeria and our team here will help with that. But if I think about it in its most basic of terms, you need people who understand the information. So at our end, we're able to help you with tools to extract it, help you along the way, and point out things that we don't think look right. But actually, what we need is someone on the other end who knows what the information should look like. So number one, you have to have people who are close enough to the information, who are experts. Then alongside them, some people with the skills. So Valeria and the team will always be working with IT people at school. So they might not necessarily understand all of the data, but they have complementary skills that will help extract it from other systems and line it up for our people. And then last but not least, one or two quite senior people who are able to drive the organization forward. So enable, quick decisions to be made if they come up from the project team to say, oh, we need to make a decision, and we're going right straight to a senior person, they can make it straight away, or to reinforce why we're doing the project and what people need to do. So just to keep things moving. So I think that's kind of three things: seniority to help keep things moving and to make decisions, technical or functional skills who understand the information that needs to come from various systems, and then people who actually understand the information that was held in those systems, who can do the checks to make sure it's okay.
Now, Valeria, I'll come to you on this next question. Something that Sentral has actually implemented to assist what Simon was just talking about is a role at Sentral that has that stakeholder expectation in mind. It's a specialist role. Can you describe what that looks like and what's involved in making that work?
So within the team, we do have a data migration specialist. They are very familiar with a lot of various systems. They come from a technical background with data analytics skill sets, and really, I guess, what they're very good at is they've also worked within a school environment, so they understand what teachers face, they understand what the IT component is on managing these things, and can actually bring it all together as they're going through the data migration process. So I guess they can simplify the technical for the data owner, for them to be able to contribute, but also be able to work at a much more technical level when they're actually moving information from one source system to another.
Now, I'll just ask you a little bit more about that. You've set this up to ensure that things go as smoothly as possible, but just a moment ago we were talking about handling large amounts of lots of different types of data and a data cleansing process. Is it reasonable to expect that a transition could take place with absolutely no errors or hiccups? And if you do get the occasional hiccup, what steps have you put in place to mitigate the effects of those problems when they happen?
Yeah, well, I think anyone that's gone through a data migration at some point in their careers or their lives, they would have seen that there's problems. For me, looking at it, it's about how you manage it. It's about the communication, how you work with the team, collaboration, because any problem is solvable. It's just making sure that you're working together in partnership with the team, the schools, internal people, whether it's on our side or whether it's with stakeholders on the school side. So it's always going to be inevitable. There's going to be a problem, but also there's always going to be an answer. It's just about working through it together.
Now, Simon, in your experience, I'd say you've seen situations where problems like these have occurred simply due to the complexity of the data that's being handled and perhaps also the scale. How do you manage expectations around those potential scenarios when working with the actual people? Like, working with the data is one thing, but in terms of managing expectations, how do we go about that?
Look, I think when we look at expectations, we're on a project. It's going to be difficult. You're going to find things out. It probably, for me, mostly comes back to, set expectations that you are going to be required to work through this project. Anchoring back in on the why we're doing it at the end. So very much realistic expectations, but tied to why we're doing it. So yes, we're going to have to do some work over the next few weeks or the next few months, and yes, you're going to be involved. And as a manager or a leader, you're planning to try and keep the workload balanced for that individual. But knowing that you're going to come back to them at the end, which is, and why we did this is, so yes, we went through a few weeks, a few months of some quite hard work, but now we're going to benefit from that for the foreseeable future. So be realistic about the expectations, but always really hang on to why we're doing it, because that was worth it at the beginning, and it's still worth it in the middle when you're going through the bit of hard work, because when you come out at the end, you go, oh, I'm going to enjoy this for the next 5 years or the next 8 years, however long it might be.
Great. Now, Valeria, coming back to you, something that I'd like to ask for all the teachers tuning in this afternoon. Quite simply, out of all of the roles in a school, teachers would make up the largest number of people working in any environment. Now, aside from the data migration and the technical things about making things happen, thinking about the teachers, Monday morning is approaching. What has to work on Monday morning?
Well, I guess come Monday morning, they need to be able to mark the role and be able to import any particular incidents along the day, during the day. But I think just as important, you've also got, enrollments officers, front office people. They're also pretty key as part of, that first day, that day one for them to be able to, take Lucy's payment or update something because, little Johnny is actually sick today, or, all those really key elements that sort of run a school all need to be operational and up and running on the first day.
So realistically then, what sort of time frame are we talking about? Does the whole thing have to be rolled out in one go, or is there a staged approach? What sort of time frame is realistic?
Well, realistically, I think on a slightly larger school, you would look at about 12 months, which gives you the opportunity to actually stagger out the rollout. So you'll have your key modules that you'll want on day one. And then throughout the terms, you've got the luxury of picking and choosing what works depending on, what term it might be, what's going to be on the critical path, what is the school's priorities. And that can be different for each school. So there's not a one size fits all. And we are certainly very flexible in working with schools just to help them get the right outcome.
That concludes part 1 of this interview. Join me for part 2, where we talk more about frequently asked questions about the process for implementing Sentral. There's a link in the description for that video. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm Colin Klupik, and we'll see you there.